All right, so today we're going to start with a brand new unit. This unit is known as the Era of Protest and Change. It will piggyback off of previous units that were the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, the LBJ, JFK presentations as well. And then we can even add the 1950s movement because we're going to be talking a lot about those previous generations as well. And we will even mention in some of the World War II generations and things like that going forward. Now, with these protests, there are a lot of people that agree and there are a lot of people that disagree. Some people wish these protests would just go away, get the heck out of here, and never exist. Those are going to be people that are usually older or agree with those older principles. And then we've got this counterculture that we're going to start to see that's going to want to see things change. And these guys are all about their music. You got Jimi Hendrix here playing at Woodstock, giving a great performance. And Woodstock had a lot of musicians that came out, gave great performances, but then it also came with some negative things if you look at it that way. We've got a heavy use of drugs. I mean, you can get some LSD acid for $1. This stuff, once it gets into your system, it never leaves you. I was reading an article several years ago. Guy had got onto a treadmill, and the LSD was stored in his fat cells. And so, as he's burning those fat cells, LSD comes back into his body, and he dies of an overdose off of LSD acid that he had taken 30 years before when he was a young man. And so, that's going to have some negative things as well. But as you can see in this picture right here, it was a very popular movement for a lot of young people. And so let's go ahead and talk about what these young people were called. They had two names. First name is the counterculture. Then most people consider these people as hippies. Now, if we go back here, we can see what a typical hippie person is going to look like. They are much like the Beat Generation, long hair. And the thing was, if you have long hair and you're a younger person, then you knew that maybe an older person with long hair, they might be pretty cool. So you knew you can kind of trust them. And there was a growing movement that if you were over the age of 30, you were probably not a person that a younger person would be willing to trust. And we're going to start to see that Beat Generation really start to take off and morph into what becomes the counterculture. And you have to remember, there's a huge generation gap. People that were over the age of 17 made up 64% of the population. And then you have under the age of 17, 36%. These are your baby boomers. They're coming around and they are in a large number. Today in our society, they make up a large proportion of U.S. citizens. And even though a lot of these people, as they grew up, they might have changed their means of thinking and how they wanted to get things done, and they might have said, "Yeah, I was young and foolish in that time and period." They still are around in large numbers, and some of them have changed, some of them have not. And another thing you want to think of: the older generation. These guys were around during the Great Depression. They were around in World War II, and they are used to being very frugal. They are used to saving things and not going out there and spending money excessively. And this newer generation is like, why do we have to do this? The economy's pretty good, everything's working great. You know what? We're not going to bow down to the conformity in which you have been instilled with. And they looked at that as a major generational gap. For that older generation, the ideas were, you know what? Let's have a good job. Let's also start a family, own a house, keep the mom happy at home, make sure the father's providing for everything. And this newer generation is like, you know what? It's not all about family. Sometimes it's all about us. And so they kind of get caught up in that idea about self expression. And a lot of times they're going to express their self expression through art and travel. You know, there's a song that said, "Head west, young man." So a lot of people went out west. And as they're going out west, they're gathering in these large communes and their ideas are just bouncing off of each other. And they're thinking that, their parents had everything all wrong. And another thing, when talking about their parents were so busy and focused on their goals that they sometimes did not give proper attention to their children. So their children grow up thinking like, you know what, I didn't get the attention I need. And so a lot of this just nothing more than a backlash against their parents. Now going back to the communes, we're going to see one really stick out in San Francisco. This is going to be known as the Haight-Ashbury Communion. And there are going to be a lot of people flocking in here, and they're all going to be bouncing off what was at the time considered very radical ideas. But one thing they all had in common was they were trying to empower minorities, and minorities need a voice in a turbulent time, in any time, and they need to ensure that they are protected underneath the laws that are in the Constitution. And as we've seen in the previous units, a lot of times that was not happening, and these people were really bringing it to the forefront, even though they are doing it in what is considered an extreme way. Now, the focus for these people was peace, love, and then we can throw in there rock and roll because it's art, and they are going to express themselves through this art. Now, a lot of times they use drugs. Timothy Leary, a former researcher for Harvard University, come up with the idea that it's a good idea to go ahead and take drugs because they will expand your mind, make you think of things that you normally don't think of, and you can go ahead and go forward. And so a lot of drug use is going to be done underneath the counterculture movement or by the counterculture movement. And we're going to see a lot of that accumulate at Woodstock. And we see pictures here at Woodstock. Woodstock was supposed to be a very simple concert that had, I believe, 8,000 people were supposed to come. But once everybody heard about it, especially musicians, they were like, hey, sign me up too. And before you know it, this very simple concert just exploded into a large amount of musicians coming out there playing on stage for days and days and days. And people were like, hey, let's go ahead and go to that thing. So more than 8,000 people showed up. It was in the tens of thousands of people that show up and just pretty much exceed the limits. They walk in with no tickets, no nothing, and it becomes a yearly thing after that. Now, another thing I've already mentioned before, these people did not trust the government. They said the government's probably lying to us. They have been lying to us about the Vietnam War, and that was shown in the Pentagon Papers. And they would lied about, the war being nearly ended in the Tet Offensive. And so these people are completely against the government. Another artist that's going to come out at that point in time is going to be known as Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol was not a musician. He was a person who worked through visual art. And if you go and grab a can of Campbell's soup, he's the guy that actually came up with the idea for that and submitted it. Now, Andy Warhol is a very iconic figure for a lot of different reasons. He was an open known gay person in a time when that was not highly accepted. And he went against the social norms, even though people kind of looked at him as being completely different. A lot of people embraced him. He became an icon, and he is a key, important person in that part of history, and he should be known for that. Another thing I can say about his art that it was a lot of times abstract, different. When I was in high school, I had to copy a method of his when I was working on a piece, and this piece was submitted to an art show, and I didn't even know. I get a call up saying, "Hey, we need you to show up tomorrow. You just won Best in Show." And I show up and I see the piece that's there, and it's an Andy Warhol kind of copy. Well, not really a copy, but more of a form of what he did. And I was just like, "Wow, this thing won!" I couldn't believe it. It completely surprised me. So I'm guessing that person was probably a big Andy Warhol fan. All right, so let's go to the next movement of change, and that's going to be the women's rights movement. This is going to be considered the second wave of feminism. That's because the first wave was during the 1920s, and even before that, with the Seneca Falls Convention and women saying we need equality or some form of it to kind of bridge the gap. And this movement will take off and try to bridge that gap even more. They had already received their right to vote, and now they are trying to go for things like equal pay, equal treatment, different things like that. And there are different levels of this feminism, as we can see today. And this movement would be inspired by the civil rights movement as well, because they saw how the African Americans were going out there in the public, getting large groups together, doing marches, sit ins, different things like that. And so this is going to provide Betty Friedan with a large audience for her book that she will come out with known as The Feminine Mystique. In this book, she talks about there's got to be more to life than just being a stay at home mom, making sure your husband's taken care of. And she's looking at this as, hey, I've got to be able to express myself, gain something like my husband's gaining. Another example, we can go to Sandra Day O'Connor, who will become the first Supreme Court justice that was a woman. Now, she graduated at the top of her class in law, but when she got out of law school, she had a very hard time getting a job. And then when she did get a job, she was often passed up promotion by a male who did not qualify compared to her credentials. And so she got very upset about that. And will continue to work hard and get involved in this movement, and things as they change will find herself in a very good position. And this is big for women because now they are able to go into some of the highest places in government. And as we've seen with our last election, a woman ran for president and nearly won. We've already seen an African American run for president and win. Sorry about that, dogs are barking. But anyways, he won and then he won again. So 2 terms. So who knows what the future is going to bring? We will see. Now, this movement will also bring about another organization. It's going to be known as NOW, or National Organization for Women. And they are going to go out there and fight for true equality. And there are two different views on this and how it's done. We're going to have the Equal Rights Movement, going to be known as the ERA, come about. They want equality across the board, no questions asked. And a lot of people are going to say you're going too far with this. And we'll talk more about that in the next lesson. And then we're going to see Gloria Steinem, who's going to use the mass media. And she's using the mass media to go ahead and get views out there. Now, one article that she writes is about the Playboy Bunnies. And the Playboy Bunnies were thought of having this great lifestyle where they can party and do all this other kind of stuff. But her article shows that no, it's not really a great lifestyle because these women have to kind of subject themselves to some very degrading types of activities that they don't always like. And so, our final picture that we're going to see here in the year 1970, we're seeing the age gap between women working in 2002 increase. And so more women are working today because now they are becoming more financially independent. And let's be honest, a lot of times in the household, the man cannot go out there and earn a household salary for everybody by himself. And so a lot of times it takes two. But one thing we do see that these numbers are very close at 16 and 19, and then also at 65 plus. So another key thing is that they both tend to go down from 45 to 54. A lot of this is because maybe they're entering that age of, hey, I can retire, I can do less work, whatever the case may be. So that is a very common thing. We had numbers down here in the 1950s. I'm sure they would probably be somewhere around 20%. A lot of these women after World War II, they did give up their jobs so the men can go back and work. But some of them really did like working, and that's why they are really pushing for this. And their children are growing up and they're seeing their mothers of those World War II veterans, and they're thinking there's got to be more than life than this. And that's where the movement really started off. The happy home mama wasn't really always happy. And the kids grew up and they said, I don't want that. All right, so that's it for today. If you need anything, get up with me at any point in time. You know how to do that. I'm sure everybody is staying safe as we can. Miss y'all. Take care. Till next time.